Zoo-wee mama. I'm here today to talk about Silver Surfer's new best friend coming to Marvel Snap. We have US Agent coming out in Spotlights on April 9th. So I'm going to go over his pros and cons, best synergies, 3 deck ideas that you can play him with, and just give my final thoughts on if he's worth chasing after and you should buy him, or if he's a bit of a bust and you should save your resources for a different card. So to get started, let's look at US Agent himself. He is a 2-cost, 3-powered card with the ongoing ability that 4, 5, and 6-cost cards here have -3 power. So he's like the cheaper version of Man-Thing, right? Man-Thing is a 4/5 that's giving negative power to 1, 2, and 3-cost cards on his lane. US Agent is a 2-cost that's hitting down the power of big expensive cards. And hopefully they're your opponent's big expensive cards, but he will also give your own cards -3 power if you do play big cards on top of him on your location. So let's first get into US Agent's best synergies. So to kick it off, we are looking at Goose. Now Goose and US Agent do something kind of similar, but that redundancy is good, okay? That means you can more consistently get out a 2-cost card that does stuff to big cost cards for your opponent, okay? It's really making it hard for your opponent to play there. You could put Goose in one lane so they just can't play big cards there. US Agent in a second lane so they don't want to play big cards there. And then they're stuck trying to put all their big stuff in a third location. Next, we are looking at Silver Surfer. US Agent works with cheap decks, okay? The best workaround to avoid hitting your own cards down -3 power by your own US Agent is just to play a really cheap deck. Silver Surfer is great for that. Most of the cards cost 3 and less. And then last up, we do have Luke Cage. Okay, if you are trying to run a deck that does have some 4, 5, or 6-cost cards, you could put in Luke Cage. Although again, really the best idea is to just not have many of those cards in your deck in the first place in case you aren't able to draw your Luke Cage. So let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly for US Agent. To start off by looking at the good, he's at least 6 power if he just triggers once, okay? Because he's a 2/3. And anytime he hits a card, you're essentially giving +3 to yourself because you're giving your opponent -3, okay? And that can build up. He does have a pretty strong power ceiling for a 2-cost card, so that's nice. His downside can be ignored in a cheap deck, like I mentioned. If you're running pretty much all 2 and 3-cost cards, you don't even have to worry about accidentally giving your own cards -3 power from US Agent. You can play him early or late. If you play US Agent on turn 2, it's similar to Goose. You're playing this 2-cost card there. It's telling your opponent, hey, you should not or you cannot play your expensive cards here. And they know to focus on a different lane. But you can also save US Agent to play on turn 5 or 6 to play on a lane after your opponent has already played big cards there. This guarantees that US Agent will get some power value. So you play him early to deter your opponent or play him later for the power value. And Goose doesn't do anything later, okay? So big plus there for US Agent. And he doesn't mind Rogue or Zabu. If your opponent plays Rogue on US Agent, the ability's still in that location. That doesn't help them out a lot. And Zabu can sneak 4-cost cards under Goose and get those bigger cards in Goose's lane. But that doesn't matter for US Agent, okay? If your opponent has Zabu or War Machine, that's not good for them, okay? They're gonna get the minus power, right? They can always play there. They just probably don't want to because of the minus power. Now to look at the bad. First up, we do have a deck building challenge, okay? You do not want US Agent in a deck that has a good number of more expensive cards. Even if you have Luke Cage, you cannot guarantee that you draw him all the time. So you really are going to limit him to a Surfer deck or cheap Zoo style decks, okay? Big limitation there. He's weak against other cheap decks. If you're playing against a Surfer deck, your US Agent is a 2/3. He's probably not doing anything unless you save him specifically for Sarah. And also on that note, if your opponent is running their own Luke Cage, US Agent isn't doing anything either, okay? And obviously, he will lose to Enchantress because that just removes his ongoing ability. Now, there's a question as to how many 4, 5, and 6-cost cards your opponent will actually put in a single lane. Okay, there are some decks that will load up lanes with a bunch of expensive cards, but oftentimes it might just be 1 or 2. So even if you do try to save US Agent for turns 5 or 6, he might just be hitting 1 card at most, as opposed to Man-Thing, where you could pretty realistically hit like 3 or even 4 cards on a pretty consistent basis, okay? So that's something to think about. And then Shang-Chi loses value. If you have US Agent down, and your opponent has, let's say, Magneto in hand, and they're worried you have Shang-Chi, they could play Magneto, who's 12 power, on your US Agent lane. That brings Magneto down to 9 power. 9 power dodges Shang-Chi, okay? So be aware that your opponent could purposely play a big card on US Agent's lane to dodge Shang-Chi. Now, this is just my friendly reminder to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already, because I make these kind of videos for every single new card release, every weekend, and more. So let's get into the floor and ceiling for US Agent. So to start off, let's look at US Agent at his reasonable worst, in which case I think you have a scenario where he's not hurting your opponent, whether they have a cheap deck or they have Luke Cage, but he's actually hurting your side. Maybe you do have, a Sarah you wanted to play, and you really want to play Sarah on his location. Well, you're either going to put Sarah on his location, which would lose 3 power, essentially then US Agent is just a 2-0, or it would deter you from playing Sarah there, and you play Sarah somewhere else that's less favorable, okay, or some other big cost card. So he's going to be a 2-0 sometimes, or a 2-3 that's deterring your own plays, which is obviously a bad thing, okay? And this won't happen too often. You probably will have targets for your opponent, but every now and then he is going to be a bit annoying to play around. I've experienced this even just with Goose in a Silver Surfer deck that has Sarah in it. Sometimes it's like you want to play Sarah on that Goose lane, like the other locations are really tough to play in, and it really makes things difficult. And this is a pretty bad floor, okay? It's definitely under the line of being competitive. You would never put that in your deck on purpose. And it's not even viable. I mean, a 2-0. There are some situations where, because of tough locations, or maybe, you got random cards in hand, or Monster Island or something, where you actually may not want to play US Agent. He may actually be a detriment. And again, this goes back to that deck building challenge, where you want to really limit the opportunity for that kind of scenario, but it will happen at times, and that's a pretty bad floor, okay? Now, in terms of his ceiling, it's possible he hits 4 cards on your opponent's side of the board. If you are playing against a Hela deck that's looking to discard a bunch of big stuff and then bring it back, or even some kind of ongoing Tribunal deck that's going to play Magic, play a bunch of big stuff, it's possible he has 4 targets, in which case he's giving your opponent minus 12 power, so his effective stats are a 215. So that's way above the line of being overpowered, but I don't think that happens all that often, because you would need your opponent to be playing a ton of big stuff on the correct lane, right? You'd need to save him for that as well. So I don't think you see that, but I do think you could commonly be hitting 2 or 3 big cards if you are playing against one of those deck archetypes I mentioned. I think overall though, for US Agent, where he lies on average, I think he's often going to be hitting 1 or 2 cards. Okay, against most decks, they will have at least 1 target and probably have maybe 2 targets in the same lane. Okay, remember, your opponent does need to be playing these big cards in the same lane as well. And so if he's hitting 1 card, he's a 2-6 on average, assuming you're not also giving your own cards minus 3 power. If he's hitting 2 cards, he's a 2-9 on average, okay? And that's decent. I mean, Dazzler is a 2-8, so a 2-6 that's maybe kind of risky is like okay, right? Again, you have to play around your own card, but a 2-9 would be solid. That's definitely above the line of being competitive, and I think that's where he falls on average. I don't think you can expect to be hitting 3 or 4 cards very often. Now, let's take a look at the 3 decks that I've put together for US Agent. So first up, we've got a Sarah Surfer list. I think this is going to be the go-to list for US Agent, okay? Surfer decks don't have too many cheaper cards that really synergize with them, and you do want cheap cards because you don't just want to start everything on turn 3. You do want something to play on turns 1 or 2. And so they've had Goose for a while, but with Zabu, he can slide cards in under there. But now there's US Agent, okay? So now you do Goose one lane, US Agent another lane like I mentioned. And the third lane, you could just stack big power. If you did want to tech in like a Cosmo, that could be really annoying for your opponent because they would either be playing their big card on a lane with Cosmo or in a lane where it's going to get -3 power, okay? So that could make it tough for them. And then we've just got a nice, Surfer package in here. We do have Hope Summers to ramp up. Absorbing Man can hit Silver Surfer, which is solid, or even hit Brood. And then we've got Sebastian Shaw to take all these buffs from Surfer and Nova. Next up, we've got this board fill tempo list. This is a list that I've been experimenting with a lot lately, and I've changed it up a bit here for US Agent. So we do have Luke Cage in here just in case he is needed, but we've got a lot of cheap stuff, okay? We've got Mysterio and Brood who can give a discount to Mockingbird. We will power them up with Blue Marvel. We can hit stuff with Valkyrie. And if we did really want to play in our US Agent lane with a bigger card, we've got Luke Cage. Okay, and we also have Dazzler in here. She's just great with Surfer decks or any cheap decks that really just fill up the board. And lastly, I've got US Agent in this Loki deck because Loki's good. Okay, the Loki archetype really is here to stay. It's just really solid and it has a lot of cheap cards. Obviously, Loki is a 4-cost card as well as Miss Marvel. And if we did get Mockingbird discounted, but sometimes you ditch your hand pretty early. And so US Agent could be good in that scenario. Or if you end up not ditching your hand, but you're sticking to cards like Snow Guard, just getting stuff with Cable. I mean, it's possible that you end up with a board that just has a couple big cards and you just play them in a lane that's not US Agent. So before I get into my final ratings for US Agent himself, I wanted to take a second to look at his Spotlight Cache. Okay, this is something that I'm going to start doing for videos going forward because it is an important decision, right? If you do not have these cards or if you already have like Mirage and Jeff, that heavily influences how you're approaching US Agent and if you're going to open your caches or not. Okay, so in terms of the token value of this variant, it's solid, it's good. We've got 2 Series 5 card and 1 Series 4 card in Mirage. Okay, so obviously Series 4 cards are only 3,000 tokens, so any Spotlight key that opens them, that Spotlight key was equivalent to 3,000 instead of 6,000. But we do have Jeff in here who is also 6,000. In terms of being competitive, it's good, okay? And Mirage isn't really contributing to this, and I'm not really accounting US Agent too much because that is, a prediction. He's not in the game yet. But Jeff is S tier for your collection. Regardless of where you're at, regardless of how many Series 3, 4, or 5 cards you have, you can use Jeff. He is S tier. Everyone should have Jeff in their collection, so Jeff alone makes this really good Spotlight Cache for picking up some competitive cards. And in terms of the variants, wow, we got some killer variants. These variants are amazing. Okay, this Jeff variant is solid. It's a good one. Mirage variant is amazing. Okay, this has to be Mirage's best variant. This is so good. Even though Mirage competitively isn't that good, this is an amazing variant. And the US Agent variant is solid as well. Okay, so pretty solid Spotlight Cache overall. Now let's get into my final reviews and ratings for US Agent himself. Alright, so in terms of being fun, I think he's okay, right? He's an ongoing, he's not coming down and doing this crazy thing at once, but you could choose to play him early to deter your opponent like I mentioned, save him for maybe turn 5 or even turn 6, just slap down a card that comes out to be like a 2-6 or 2-9 and surprise your opponents with all of his negative power on their side of the board. That could be kind of fun, but nothing crazy. In terms of being flexible, I do not think he's flexible at all. I think his flexibility is bad, really bad, okay? He works great in Surfer, amazing in Surfer. And, maybe some kind of Zoo decks or even some Patriot stuff or some Cerebro maybe. But if you have something with just a few big cost cards, you're gonna want Luke Cage, and you can't always guarantee that you draw Luke Cage in the game that you drew US Agent, okay? So pretty tough flexibility. He is a deck building challenge, okay? You do really have to consider that and his limitations. In terms of being competitive, I think he's okay. He's maybe good, he's maybe close to that line, but I think he's okay. I do think he's one of the worst cards of the month, but I think we have really strong cards this month, okay? This April season, we got some good cards. So him being lower on there doesn't mean he's bad. It's just tough competition. But, I don't think he does anything too crazy. I think he's significantly better than Man-Thing, who's his more expensive counterpart. I think he's kind of, easier to play around. He does get negated by Luke Cage. If you've got mirror matchups, they might just negate each other. Or if he makes Surfer meta, then he doesn't do anything against other Surfer decks, okay? So as he gets more popular, it kind of loses out a bit. And, I just think he's okay. In terms of would I chase after him, I'd say no, okay? If you love playing Silver Surfer, he might be worth it. Or if you need Jeff, it's worth it to open the Spotlight caches. But I would not specifically chase after US Agent if you're not planning to play a bunch of Silver Surfer. That's going to be his go-to list. He's going to have a few others, but not super versatile. And I don't think he's necessarily like a game-winning card, and he's not super crazy fun, okay? I don't really see a great reason to chase after him unless you're trying to keep up a full collection or you're going to open Spotlight caches anyways for these other cards or the variants. So those are my thoughts on US Agent. Let me know what you think of him in the comments below. What combos, what decks you're excited to play him in. Do you think he's going to be better in any other deck than Silver Surfer? I mean, that's the obvious home, at least is how I see it. So let me know what you think. And until then, stay positive. I'll see you next time.